Erev Tov Batay. There were several questions we had, regarding the kashrut, especially with fish. So let me explain to you what I'm talking about, right? First of all, there's like several things, but I want to tell you first the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says, if you go to a store, right, of a goy, and you want to buy fish there, you go to, supermarket or fish store, whatever it is, are you allowed to buy from a goy? This is the question, right? So the question is, the answer is that if you see that the fish has scales on the skin, you're allowed to buy it. Why? Because every fish which has scales is kosher. Right? We call that in Hebrew kaskasim. Right? So the truth is, that the Torah says that fish has two kosher signs. One is snapir and one is kaskasim. Right? What is snapir? Fins. Fins, right? Those are the things that they swim with, That's called the fins. And then kaskasim is the scales. So you need two, right? But the Gemara says something else. Gemara says if it has scales, for sure it has fins also. It has kaskasim. It has snapir. So if you see scales, that's good enough. You don't have to see the fins. This is the rule, So that's why the Shulchan Aruch says if you go to the store, right, and you see a fish with scales, that means that it's kosher, right? You can buy it from the goy. Of course, we're not talking about cooked fish, right? We're talking about raw fish. Cooked fish is not allowed. Fish that was cooked by a goy. That's a different discussion. We have to talk about that too. But anyway, so the thing is like this, right? This says the Shulchan Aruch, even if you see it sliced, the fish, right? They have slices. And you see scales, but some slices don't have scales, But if they match up, they're the same size. You see, right? It's one body. So you're allowed to buy it anyway, because it's like one body there, Proportional. That's the thing, right? That's the way it goes. Okay, so therefore, right, this is the way you see, right, if it's kosher or not. If you have kashrut, it's even better. You don't need all this to worry about all these things. If there's kashrut on the fish. But here's the thing, right? Sometimes fish has no kashrut, right? Let's say you buy, a can of tuna, right, with no kashrut. So the question is this kosher or not? So the truth is, I told people, that this is not kosher. You cannot buy this. Why? Because if it doesn't have kashrut, the problem is, since they slice it up, it's in the can already sliced up. There's no scales there. You don't see any scales. You know what I mean? So if you don't see any scales, how do you know if it's kosher? Right? So the only way you can know is by having a kashrut, hechsher. That's or this or that, right? You have to have one or the other, otherwise you can't eat this fish.
How are you going to see the scales in the can?
You cannot, that's what you said.
You can't, that's why you need kashrut.
If they prepare somewhere,
Yeah.
I would be, thinking. But if
Because over there, right, wherever they make it, there's a mashgiach there, who's checking what's going on.
you
understand?
Can.
Yeah.
So how are you going to look for scales?
You understand what I'm saying? I don't think you're understanding me. There's a mashgiach there in the factory who's checking the fish. That's why they have kashrut.
You're talking about not kosher.
He's talking about cans, kosher cans.
Kashrut. You understand what's kashrut?
He's talking about can that doesn't have a kashrut.
Yeah, it doesn't have, you cannot buy that. But if it has kashrut, you can buy.
Right, there is no question.
Yeah, that's it. That's what we're saying.
But you were saying
Yeah.
before that,
Yeah.
said if you see the can that doesn't have kashrut, can we buy it or not?
Yeah, the answer is no.
Then we start talking about scales. I cannot see scales inside the can.
Okay, you didn't understand me. You didn't understand me properly. Again, right, let's review one more time. If it has scales, you can buy without kashrut. If it doesn't have scales, you need kashrut. That's what we're saying.
We're talking about live fish.
Any fish, yeah, raw fish, yeah. That's the way it is. That's the way it goes. So therefore, right, that's the rule. That if you see the scales or you have kashrut, one or the other. By the way, comes the Yalkut Yosef and says something interesting about this. He says that there are certain companies, like where they have OU, like Bumblebee, they have OU, right? Right? So OU is kashrut, right? But says Yalkut Yosef, you shouldn't buy that one.
You shouldn't?
No, should not. Why? Because he says, right, that they don't. The problem is, that there are some types of tuna which are not kosher. There are several types of tuna. Some of them don't have scales at all. So he says the problem is, with the OU, they don't check, the fish. They don't check it, the mashgiach. So therefore, it could be that some non-kosher tuna got in there, and mixed in with the kosher tuna. So he says, don't buy OU. Yalkut Yosef says like that.
What's the nafkamina between regular kashrut to...
Because when they have a different kashrut, right? They have a mashkiach temidi there, the factory.
you don't have?
He's checking, right? They don't have,
They don't have?
They have a kula a little bit. They're a little bit more lenient, What can you do, right? That's the way it is. So he says don't buy. The truth is, I personally don't agree with this, and I'll tell you why. Because even if you say, right, that there are some non-kosher types of tuna, but the truth is that it gets nullified, it's batel berov. If there's a non-kosher type that got mixed in, since most of it is kosher, how do I know most of it is kosher? Because bumblebee tells me, right? Bumblebee tells me that this is a kosher type of tuna, What do they call it, right? There's different types of names for the tuna, right? So bumblebee tells me this is albacore, right? Albacore tuna is kosher. So since bumblebee is telling me it's mostly albacore, that's what they're selling you, right? So it says Yalkut Yosef, but it could be also other things are mixed in there. So I tell you, right, that the majority is, is albacore, so it gets nullified, right? It gets batel barov, It doesn't get nullified, by the way, if it's a complete fish, But here we're talking about it's already chopped up. So once you chop it up, it does get nullified. So it seems to me, to buy OU, tuna fish is okay, But Yalkut Yosef is machmir. What can I tell you,
Yeah. Rabbi,
He doesn't allow. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
what about the black carrot?
Caviar? No, that's treif for sure.
Not kosher.
It comes from sturgeon, right? Which is sturgeon is treif.
But I saw some place still like a kosher.
Yeah, because it comes from a different fish. It's a different kind of fish.
No.
It's the same color, but a different kind of fish. That's what it is. It's a fake caviar. Yeah. It's not the real thing. It's a different type.
So you cannot eat it.
You can eat it because that fish is kosher. If it has kashrut, it's okay because they checked it. You know what I mean? If it has kashrut, it's kosher. It's okay. But if it doesn't have kashrut, but it says, caviar, even if it says kosher, you cannot rely on that.
So you're saying there's black caviar that's kosher?
Most of the black caviar is not kosher, right? But they have now a special type which is kosher. Right? It looks the same, but it's a different kind of fish. So that one is okay, but it has to have kashrut. You know who gives kashrut on this? Star K, So if you see Star K there, that's okay, you can buy that one. But stam, to buy caviar, black caviar, not kosher.
You don't trust.
I'm sorry?
Or you don't trust.
For this you can trust him for caviar, but it's not caviar, it's not OU, it's Star K. That's the one who's giving. That's the one who's giving the kashrut on the caviar, Okay, whatever. So that's very important to understand, right? Okay. Now let's go to a different case. What about sardines? Right? We all like to eat sardines, right? Everybody likes that. Even Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, we all like it. So do you need kashrut on sardines? This is the question, right? Or not, So very simple, right? Since the sardine is whole, right, you look at it. If it has scales, it's kosher, right? So it doesn't matter. It doesn't need kashrut. You understand? If you see the scales, open it up. You see the fish has scales. It's kosher. If it doesn't have scales, it's not kosher. You know what I mean? So sardines, are much easier than tuna because it's still the whole body's there. The skin is still there. So it's much easier to tell what you're getting over there. You know what I mean? More or less. And some sardines also have kashrut. Baruch Hashem, that's even better. Okay, kol hakavod, right? If you have kashrut, even better, right? But let's say, somebody bought a can, right, of sardines with no kashrut, right? So if you open it, and you see there's the scales, no problem. So let me ask you a question right now, right? Mechila Rabotai. Please. So let me ask you a question now, right? So but this tuna, that we buy, right? And also the sardines, you know what they do with it, right? It's not exactly raw.
They marinate.
They steam it, they smoke it or steam it, So isn't that like cooking? It's cooked by a goy. Oh, so how do you buy like this? Cooked by a goy. The tuna is not raw; it's steamed. They steam it. They cook it with steam. So how do you buy such a tuna like this? It's not what? It was cooked by a Jew? No, it's cooked by a goy. How do you buy? How do we buy this? So you know what the answer is? Says Shulchan Aruch that steaming or smoking, or things like this, are not really called cooking in halakha. So this is the reason why. So even though it's really cooking, but in halakha we don't call that cooking. So therefore, this is the reason why. Smoked. If it was smoked or steamed by a goy, you're allowed to eat that. There's no problem with that. Even though you say, oh, it's cooked by a goy. Not exactly. That's not, that we don't call that cooking. Also, right, same thing. If you pickle something, right? You know what's pickling? They make it like sour. They put it into vinegar. So that also cooks it a little bit, right? Makes it like tender. Like that fish that we buy, right? What is that called? Silotka, right? They pickle it. Yeah, silotka. Yeah. So it's that is like they pickle it. Herring, right? We call that in English, herring. So is that allowed? Yes, because that's also not called cooking, right? When you pickle something. So the Shulchan Aruch says all these things are not called cooking, whether it's smoking or steaming, right, or pickling. These are all kosher.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What about fillet? If you don't know the skin, you don't know if you have the...
So that's what we said about the chunks, right? The chunks are not good because you don't see the scales.
So if I'm buying, but if there is kashrut...
Kashrut is okay. They checked it. Somebody checked it.
So I
there.
can trust it even if it's coming from...
Yeah, you can trust it. Yeah, otherwise we can't eat nothing.
Even if I don't recognize the fish?
Right? That's what we say, right? The one witness is believed. So they have one witness who's checking it. Problem is, Yalkut Yosef says they don't have that with the tuna. With the OU. That's what he's telling you, right? Don't eat that stuff. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. Okay, fine. So that's the thing. So that's a good question. But here now, right? I told you another question that somebody gave me just recently. And we had a little bit, argument about this. But I showed him, that he's, I think, making a mistake, and I'll tell you what it is. Okay, right? Apparently, they're doing Solash Lishit, right, in the synagogues, right? Rabbi does it downstairs, some shuls do it different, whatever, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. Right? They do Solash Lishit. So he told me, right, that they're going to buy this fish, okay? And the package says salmon. Salmon is kosher, right? But here's the thing, right? The way it's packaged, there's no scales there. It's just, like fillets, as you said, right? You cannot see the scales. You know what I mean? It's like just they cut it, they take off, they skin it, so you don't see nothing, right? So he was, he was thinking to say, this guy, my friend, that it's okay. Why? Because you can see it's salmon, right? It's red, it's red. Everybody knows red is salmon. The truth is, I told him, I said, don't rely on this, honestly, I'll tell you why, because it's not Shulchan Aruch doesn't allow this. You know what I mean? It only allows if you see the scales. Or it has kashrut, right? Problem is, this one doesn't see the scales, and also has no kashrut, right? So then how can you buy fish like this? You know what I mean? So what are you going to tell me? But that's the only fish that looks like that, right? Red like this. There's no other fish like that, right? The truth is, how do we know? I don't know. Do I know every creature which is in the sea? What am I, Jacques Cousteau? What? I don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? What do I know? Even Jacques Cousteau didn't know what's going on over there, Do you know how many creatures there are in the sea? You know what I mean? How many fish there are, how many things there are. We don't know everything, So I don't know. I personally, I'll tell you, I would tell people, don't buy this kind of fish, If you're going to buy salmon, either you should have kashrut or you should see the scales. Otherwise, don't, Because when they slice it, right, like Norwegian style, the scales are still there. So it's okay, Sliced. But the problem is if they take off the skin, you don't see nothing. So then it's a little bit of a problem. I wouldn't buy this kind of fish. I personally, I don't think it's possible to buy something like that. So, we have to be careful, right, when it comes to fish. I'll tell you one more thing, we'll finish here. Just somebody, texted me today, from Main Street. You probably know this guy, but I'm not going to mention his name. Anyway, right, he's from our community. So he asked me a good question, which is, Rabbi, he says, are we allowed to really, he says, I heard your lectures, he listens to my lectures, right? So he says, are we allowed to really, like what you said, we can buy oil, without hechsher, vegetable oil or things like this, I told him, I said, for sure it's allowed, there's no question. What do you need a hechsher on oil for? You don't need a hechsher on oil. So he tells me, he says, so then, I guess he was talking to somebody else, I don't know, somebody gave him a nice idea, question from me, on me, right? So the question was, but he says, in the same plant that they're making the oil, maybe they're also making, some non-kosher things, lard, things like this, right? Non-kosher. So maybe it gets mixed in, in the same plant. That's it. It's a chacham. Yeah? When you have a chacham, you don't need nothing else, right? That's it. So I told him, I said two things, besides what you said. I'll tell you what I answered him. The answer is like this, Number one is that even if they're making two types of food in the same plant, right? The law says in America, you have to wash it in between. When you switch the food, they have to wash it. That's one thing, So we're not so worried about that. Number one. Number two, also, even if they didn't wash it, let's say, right? They cheated. Let's say, right? They cheated. They didn't wash it. Right? Who's standing over there? Some policemen watching them. If they're, sometimes there's no policeman there. Right? There's only Hashem is the policeman, right? So how do we really know that they washed it? Maybe they didn't. I don't know. So the answer is like this. Even if they didn't wash it, it gets nullified. Why? Because it's such a small amount of residue. That gets left over. It gets batel. It gets nullified. Sometimes it's b'shishim, like you said, right? 60th, 1/60th, it gets nullified. Sometimes even, right, it's batel berov. There are certain things that get nullified even in a majority. Depends on what the food is. From the Torah, it gets batel berov. But from the rabbis, they made shishim. Batel b'shishim. So anyway, right? Either way, you're not going to have that much, residue left over. So this is the reason why we're not worried about things. And also, by the way, honestly, I don't think it's very common, that they're doing, in the same plant, like vegetable oil and also lard, that doesn't make sense. But even if they are, it's okay. What I'm trying to tell you, right? You're just making up things like this. But so when it comes to things like that, we're not so worried about things like that. You should know, by the way, just, to tell you a general rule, what do you think 100 years ago, right? We had kashrut on anything? There wasn't kashrut on nothing. The kashrut is something new. You know why? Because it's a business, people are making parnasa, on kashrut. It's a big business, $1 million business. It's a lot of money. I'm not telling you what they're doing is bad, by the way. I'm not telling you it's bad. There's a public service and, it's good, it's positive. But you shouldn't think, right, that before there was kashrut 100 years ago, we couldn't buy nothing, it's not true. It says in the poskim, that you're allowed to buy many, many things, before we had kashrut. So you don't need kashrut for many, many things. But you know what it is? When it comes to fish, which is from the Torah, the kashrut and the fish is from the Torah. So there we have to be more careful, And also, all the more so, right? Kol sheken on meat and chicken, right? Things like this, beef, right? There you have to be very careful, You need really good kashrut there, Not, this fake kasher, that they have, right? Magen David, this is not a good kashrut, this one, It has to be glad kosher, And even Bet Yosef is even better, right? Bet Yosef is really the best one. Or glad, at least minimum glad, or if even better Bet Yosef. For Sfaradim, Bet Yosef is the proper one. So try to get Bet Yosef if you can. Says Maran al-Badi al-Shalom that if you cannot find Bet Yosef, right? Let's say Ashkenazi invited you, right, to his house. And he doesn't eat Bet Yosef, we eat Bet Yosef, Sfaradim. They don't have Bet Yosef, they have glad kosher. Ashkenazi glad. So are we allowed to eat that? So says Maran, Yebi Omer Chelekei, we're allowed to eat it. Why? Because of stiksekat, double doubt, right? Double doubt. Maybe the halacha is like the one who says you don't need Bet Yosef. There is a shita like that. There is an opinion like that, like Ramah, right? And maybe, right? If you tell me halacha is like Maran Bet Yosef, maybe this one is glad. How do you know it's not glad? How do you know it's not Bet Yosef? Maybe it is. Sometimes even Ashkenazi can't have Bet Yosef. You never know, right? We don't know what this is. We don't know where it came from. We cannot trace it, right? What are we going to do? Investigation? Investigate? What are we going to do? We don't know where it came from. Could be that it's Bet Yosef. So either way, right? This kind of thing, But when it comes to meat and fish, we're more stringent, we're more strict. Try to have a good kashrut, But when it comes to, things like this, vegetable oil, and tomato sauce, you don't need kashrut on things like this. What do you need? But you just look at the ingredients, see what's in there, and that's it, גמרנו. ברוך אדוני לעולם, אמן ואמן. ותהי חנן, כשאומר, רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לעשות בישראל, ותהי חלפי בלהם תורה ומצוות שנאמר בני חפץ, למען צדקו יגדיל תורה בידי.